a darker than blue. Don't let us hang around this town and let what others say come true. We're just good for nothing. They all figure a boy should roll up shoeless jizz. Peace, everyone, and welcome to Darker Than Blue, another episode of Darker Than Blue. I am Jackie Lukeman. I'm so glad you are here with me today. And man, we have a lot to talk about. And interesting how my teleprompter thingy is not working the way it should. So let's just do this the old-fashioned way, shall we? Thank you so much for joining me here on Darker Than Blue today. This is the show where we talk about politics for the people that you just heard Brother Curtis Mayfield say are darker than blue. And sometimes things things will do what they will do. Technology does what it does, and we continue on as we can with all of this. There is so much going on, ladies and gentlemen. There is so much to discuss, but I wanted to start with some history. Okay, so let's go. Beginning on January 19th, 1930, mobs of up to 500 white people roamed Watsonville, California, and the surrounding towns and farms, attacking Filipino farm workers and their property after Filipino men were seen dancing with white women at a newly opened local dance hall. In the days and weeks before the rioting, politicians and community leaders had ramped up their Filipino rhetoric, calling the farm workers a menace and demanding that Filipino residents be deported so, quote, white people who have inherited this country for themselves and their offspring could live, end quote. That this really is how they think of themselves in relation to this country, or what they think of this country in relation to themselves. A local judge stated, quote, the worst part of the Filipino man being here is his mixing with young white girls from 13 to 17. They were very specific in that age range. He gives them silk underwear, the judge says, and makes them pregnant, and crowds whites out of jobs in the bargain, end quote. One Watsonville mob was initially turned away from the dance hall by security guards and the armed owners of the hall, but returned in force to beat dozens of Filipino farm workers. The beatings continued elsewhere in the area, and on the night of January 22nd, a mob ransacked Filipino farm workers' homes and shot into the dwellings, killing Fermin Tobera. No one was ever charged with this murder. 7 men were later convicted of rioting, but received either probation or 30 days in jail. The anti-Filipino violence continued in California in the months after the Watsonville riots ended on January 23rd, with violence breaking out in Stockton, Salinas, San Francisco, and San Jose. In 1933, California enacted a law to prohibit marriages between Filipino and white residents. And in 1934, answering in part a long-standing request of California's government, Congress reduced Filipino immigration to the U.S. to just 50 people per year. In September 2011, the California legislature officially expressed regret and apologized for these events and actions, but ain't nobody send a check so they can take their apology. And on January 20th, 1870, Hiram Rhodes Revels was elected to the Senate, becoming the first African American to serve in the U.S. Congress. Mr. Revels was elected in Mississippi to fill the vacancy left after the state's secession from the Union. And it established, after the Confederacy's 1865 defeat,
in the Civil War, Reconstruction amendments to the Constitution abolished slavery, established the citizenship of formerly enslaved Black people, and granted Black people civil rights, including granting Black men the right to vote for a brief construction period. Exactly, I think it was what, 12 years, which lasted until 1867. Yeah. Federal officials and troops remained in southern states and enforced those new rights. Why did they have to? Because did you really think that the former slave owners were just going to go ahead and treat their former property equally because the law said so? Oh, come on, please. Federal officials and troops remained in southern states and enforced these new rights. As a result, Black people in the South were, for the first time, voters, political candidates, and election winners. Mr. Revels was one of those winners. However, immediately upon Mr. Revels' arrival in Washington, Southern white politicians, still committed to the idea of white supremacy and racial hierarchy, were determined to block his seating to Congress. They declared his election null and void. Yeah, they did, asserting various dubious objections, including a claim that Mr. Revels was ineligible for the Senate because, like all Black Americans, he was not a U.S. citizen until the passage of the 14th Amendment. They didn't want Black people to be citizens. And then the law said, yes, they are citizens. And they were like, no, forget that law. Hiram Revels was eventually seated in the Senate on February 25th, 1870, after a Senate vote of 48-8. However, the attempt to prevent Mr. Revels from taking his rightful place in office was an early illustration of the deeply rooted racial animus and belief in inequality that remained in the South and in the entire country. That would continue to terrorize and plague Black people for generations, especially after federal protection was withdrawn, after those federal troops were withdrawn from the South. And we talked about why that happened and who agreed to it and for what reason a couple of shows ago. Then on January 21st, 1948, Senator James Eastland of Mississippi led a successful campaign to block an anti-lynching bill that would have held members of lynch mobs and local law enforcement officers accountable for their role in racial terror lynchings. Before the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing, Senator Eastland, an ardent segregationist and supporter of white supremacy, proclaimed that time has cured lynchings and refused to acknowledge the role that law enforcement had played for decades in the lynchings of thousands of Black Americans. He knew. He knew law enforcement was involved. Everybody knew law enforcement was involved in lynchings. They just didn't care. And he said it. Senator Eastland, a wealthy plantation owner who served as U.S. Senator from Mississippi from 1942 to 1978, why a former plantation owner was allowed to be a U.S. Senator is one of the reasons we are in the mess we are in today, but that's a whole nother conversation. Anyway, Eastland was senator from Mississippi from 1942 to 1978, built his political career on promoting white supremacy, defending racial segregation, and blocking civil rights bills. His campaign to block anti-lynching legislation in the Senate was supported by dozens of Southern white politicians who successfully filibustered every anti-lynching bill since the first one was introduced in 1918. So folks who sit around today talking about Black folks aren't unified, we don't do this, we don't, shut up. You don't know history. That's why you believe that. Anyway, at the January 21st hearing, Senator Eastland launched unfounded attacks on the constitutionality of the anti-lynching bill, which would make lynching a federal crime, and disparaged the Supreme Court as not judicially honest. In contending there was no need for an anti-lynching bill, Senator Eastland incorrectly declared that, quote, we don't have any lynchings now, end quote. Though the number of racial terror lynchings had declined by 1948, there were still more than 4 dozen lynchings recorded during the 1940s, including at least 6 in Senator Eastland's own state. He knew, and he knew he was lying. Senator Eastland's attempt to downplay the history and continued threat of lynching was particularly blatant, given that Mississippi is among the states with the highest number of documented racial lynchings from 1877 to 1950. His own family also had ties to racial terror violence. In 1904, the same year Eastland was born, his father, Woods Eastland, led a lynch mob that captured and brutally lynched a black man named Luther Holbert and an unidentified black woman without trial or due process of law. The 2 lynched victims were mutilated and burned alive before a crowd of 600 spectators. No one was ever punished for their deaths. Mr. Holbert had been accused of killing the future senator's plantation owning uncle, for whom Eastland was named, but of course there was never any evidence that such an accusation was true. As the federal government refused to protect Black Americans, racial terror lynchings remained an ongoing threat to Black communities for nearly a century. This was also the result of the federal troops being removed from the South. Victims of racial terror lynchings were hanged, shot, stabbed, drowned, and burned alive, killed by mobs who never faced prosecution for their actions. It was not uncommon for lynch mobs to seize their victims from jails, prisons, courtrooms, or police custody. And in many cases, law enforcement officials were complicit or active participants in lynchings. The anti-lynching bill that came before the Senate in 1948 proposed to hold law enforcement accountable specifically for lynchings of people who were in their custody. Due to the efforts of Southern white politicians like Senator Eastland, the bill failed. Out of more than 200 anti-lynching bills introduced in Congress, only 3 passed the House and none passed the Senate until 2018. It was not until 2022 that the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act was passed by both houses of Congress, signed by President Biden on March 29, 2022, making lynching a federal hate crime. And that's the least Biden could have done, considering the fact that he bragged about Senator Eastland being one of his close friends and mentors. On January 22, 1953, the U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that restaurants in Washington, D.C. could continue refusing service to Black patrons. 3 years prior, 86-year-old civil rights activist Mary Church Terrell, my girl, began a lawsuit against Thompson's Restaurant, located a few blocks from the White House, which had denied service to her and several colleagues because they were Black. Mrs. Terrell invoked a set of laws outlawing racial discrimination in restaurants and other places of public accommodation that had been passed during Reconstruction following the Civil War by Washington, D.C.'s newly elected biracial government. Reconstruction is an incredibly important period of time that too few people in this country know about. In the 1870s, when the federal government retreated from the promise of racial progress ushered in by the Reconstruction era, what does that mean? The federal government withdrew the troops from the South. That's what they mean. It did so not just in the former Confederate states, but also in its own capital. Congress abolished the city's locally elected biracial government and replaced it with a federally appointed commission of white men. Segregation became deeply entrenched in the district, and these anti-discrimination laws, though never explicitly repealed, stopped being enforced. During the Jim Crow era, white Americans across the country who were committed to racial hierarchy thought it was really important to uphold racial exclusion in the nation's capital. After Mississippi Senator Theodore Bilbo in 1940 became chairman of the congressional committee responsible for overseeing the district, he told an audience, quote, "I wanted this position so I could keep Washington a segregated city," end quote. In ruling against Mrs. Terrell on January 22, 1953, the U.S. Court of Appeals declared that the district's Reconstruction government had lacked the authority to pass laws banning segregation, claiming only Congress had the power to do so. It also held that even if the Reconstruction government had held such authority, the laws could not be enforced because they had been disregarded for over 80 years. However, Mrs. Terrell and her legal team appealed the ruling to the Supreme Court, and 5 months later, on June 8, 1953, the court decided unanimously in her favor, in holding that the Reconstruction era anti-discrimination laws were still valid, and thus segregation in the district in restaurants was illegal. This ruling only applied to Washington, D.C., though. It would take over a decade with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 for segregation in public restaurants to be outlawed across the United States. The Reconstruction era is woefully understudied, but I'm fitting to try to fix that. On January 23rd, 1870, over 100 Blackfeet, most of whom were women, children, the elderly, and those suffering from disease, were massacred by U.S. soldiers led by Major Eugene Baker near the Marias River, referred to as the Bear River by the Blackfeet, in the Montana Territory. At dawn, Major Baker and his men came upon a Blackfeet camp led by a man named Heavy Runner. The majority of the Blackfeet men had gone out to hunt, while the rest of the band lay sleeping. Major Baker was told by a subordinate that the people in the camp were not engaged in a military conflict with the U.S. government. And that's a whole nother discussion right there, but that's what he said. Heavy Runner, after being awoken, presented papers to the U.S. soldiers attesting to friendly relations with U.S. authorities. In spite of this, in spite of having papers, in spite of proving that we're not at war with y'all, Heavy Runner was promptly shot, and Major Baker ordered his soldiers to attack the rest of the camp. The U.S. soldiers shot indiscriminately into lodges. They also shot at the tops of dwellings, so the structures would collapse upon the central fires and burn the people inside alive. According to a survivor who was taken prisoner during the massacre, U.S. soldiers killed 90 women, 50 children, and 15 men in Heavy Runner's band and destroyed 44 buildings. Other accounts put the number of Blackfeet murdered at over 200. A single member of the U.S. Army died. Neither Major Baker nor any of his genocidal men received disciplinary action for this atrocity. Major Baker's soldiers also stole over 100 horses and burned clothing and provisions, making it difficult for the surviving Blackfeet to endure the minus 30-degree temperatures. Many subsequently froze to death, which is exactly what Major Baker and his men intended, which is why they burned their clothes and food. The Marias River Massacre, also known as the Bear River Massacre or the Baker Massacre, was the largest massacre of indigenous people in present-day Montana, and one episode in the bloody campaign by the U.S. Army to dispossess the Blackfeet and other indigenous peoples of their territory. Whereas in the early 1800s, the Blackfeet had a population of about 20,000 by the end of the century, settler colonial violence, disease, and starvation brought the number down to just 5,000. A separate mass killing of indigenous people Known also as the Bear River Massacre, took place on January 29, 1863, when U.S. soldiers ambushed and killed at least 350 Shoshone people in present day Idaho. And on January 23rd, 1963, Patricia Stevens Dew was arrested in the segregated lobby of the Florida Theater in Tallahassee for entering the whites only section. Although the city dropped the case, Stevens Dew filed a lawsuit against the city for their support of racial apartheid. While an agreement was made that Dew would drop the suit if the city desegregated their courtroom, not the movie theater, but the courtroom, the city went back on their promise, sparking a new wave of student protests of the movie theaters. Over 200 students were arrested and 37 were tear gassed in their efforts to desegregate the theaters. Stevens Dew's eyes were damaged by tear gas used by police during one of those protests. As a result, she had to wear dark glasses for the rest of her life. The city later changed its legal tactics, allowing students to peacefully protest in front of the theaters without police brutality and chemical assault. A few years earlier, but just to give you an idea of the kind of system Miss Dew was, on February 20th, 1960, in Tallahassee, Miss Stevens Dew was fined and arrested at a Woolworth lunch counter that denied African Americans the right to be seated. She refused to pay a fine and instead chose to stay in jail, a part of the jail no bail tactic that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee popularized. To learn more about Stevens Dew, read the book she wrote with her daughter, uh, Tananarive Dew. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And that book is called Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. Now, dear friends, I wanted to open our discussion today with a history that happened this week that is directly connected to the violent, undemocratic, racist, xenophobic, illegal actions going on in several cities across the country right now, not just in Minneapolis. Now, if you did not know this history, if this is the first time you've heard about any of what I just said, I hope you noticed how familiar it all sounds to what is happening today and what has been happening in this country since this history was established. This history is vitally important to us understanding why what is happening today is happening, how we got to this point, who is responsible. We need to know this history because it helps us understand the nature of our present struggles and explains why we continue to experience this repression over and over and over again, it seems. We must do this. We must understand this history because there is widespread disunity and a lack of clarity among the masses about who we are fighting, why, and how we can defeat them. There is no common struggle for common goals because we are not clear on who our common enemies are, why they're at war with us, and how they carry out that war. This fractured reality in the US is largely due to the lack of importance placed on understanding revolutionary theory. Some mistakenly believe that studying theory is a pointless academic exercise that movement leaders use to intimidate or control young organizers. Or, some people believe that it's something that out of touch, old movement veterans who are no longer engaged in the real work of organizing focus on, or that those who don't actually want to do any real work obsess over rather than focusing on and doing the work that needs to be done. However, none of that is true. Reading and understanding theory is key to organizing. It is the backbone that makes the work strategic, effective, and sustainable. Without understanding theory and the history that shapes it, there's no fundamental understanding of what is to be done about whatever is going on now. But this is not clear because maybe people misunderstand what theory itself is. Theory is not an educated guess. It's not a hypothesis. That's what a hypothesis is. It's an educated guess that precipitates tests to prove or disprove it, right? That's not what a theory is. Let's be clear that theory is a set of ideas and principles that comes when one observes and analyzes facts and then seeks to answer the questions why, how, who causes this to happen. Theory helps determine potential actions or outcomes by identifying cause and effect through observing patterns in material realities, providing a lens for interpreting the world, and making informed decisions. Theory is not a guess. So, in science, the theory of evolution is not a guess about how evolution happens, but an explanation of how evolution happens based on observations and the study of data. Marxist theory is the analysis of class conflict in the context of social economics. Critical race theory analyzes the way systemic racism is institutionalized through laws, policies, practices. None of these theories are guesses about these topics, but the outcomes of analyzing the facts involving those topics. Theory helps us name exactly what we are fighting. It's what allows us to move beyond general concerns about poverty to understand what causes and maintains poverty, which are capitalism, classism, white supremacy, patriarchy, imperialism, right? This helps us focus on those dynamics that create poverty rather than just putting a band aid on the problem and leaving the cause untouched. Without theory, reform policies that most people focus on all the time, the band aid, are usually identified as the answer to the problem without theory. For example, in the case of concerns about poverty, the reform might be to campaign for a higher federal minimum wage, which is absolutely necessary considering the federal minimum wage has been a paltry $7.25 an hour since 2009, while the cost of living has increased at a much higher rate. But with theory, people understand that raising the federal minimum wage is not enough to solve poverty because they're fighting against the exploitative class dynamics of capitalism itself, not just the lack of an adequate minimum wage. Theory doesn't rule out the need for reforms to provide immediate relief or correction in some cases. Yeah, theory doesn't say, no, you can't solve any part of this problem until you no, that's not what theory does. Instead, it helps explain why the reforms that we need are actually insufficient to really fully and finally address conditions. For a more relevant example, just yesterday, 7 Democrats voted to continue and increase funding for ICE, right? In spite of all the terror they're unleashing out in the open now. Theory helps us look at the behavior of the Democrats who voted for this mess over their careers so we can see that their rhetoric, what they said about being powerless because they don't control Congress and they can't do anything except to ensure oversight over ICE by insisting on body cameras and reports to be included in the funding package. Theory helps us see that that is exactly what it is. It's empty rhetoric that attempts to give cover to the fact that Democrats have never opposed funding the abuse of largely Black, brown, and poor people before now. We talked about that at length last week and a few shows ago. Theory also helps us demystify who is really on the side of the people. When we look at the words of politicians like Jasmine Crockett, who a lot of people love and believe is on the side of the people because, she has the homegirl kind of vibe and that's kind of cool. I like it. She can be funny sometimes. But y'all, we don't need comedy and girl boss attitude right now. We need leaders. with people focused morals, principles, and courage to stand up for what is right for humanity, not their pockets and not their political party. So when we practice the theory, we learn and investigate the truth of what Crockett actually supports by looking at how she votes. And when we do that, the view is very different. So we are just at 30 minutes past the hour, folks. So you know what that means. It is time for a WPFW station break. So, engineer extraordinaire, what do you have on tap for the people today?
Calling all brothers. Calling all black men in the DC and DMV for a meeting with Million Man Vote to plan our impact on the 2026 DC and regional elections. Saturday, February 7th at 10 a.m. at Matthews Memorial Baptist Church, 2616 Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue, Southeast. Free breakfast and parking available. Registration information can be found at mmv.eventbrite.com. Inside of the thing, when I pick the pieces and I regain my name, and I fought y'all to call my
I am all for free breakfast every time. Thank you so much. I appreciate that information. So let's pick up with our girl Jasmine Crockett, because listen, Crockett did not vote to fund ICE and DHS, which is what Democrats voted for yesterday. But a few days ago, she did vote for HR 7006. What is that, you might ask? It is the Financial Services and General Government and National Security Department of State and Related Programs Appropriations Act, which includes at least 3.3 billion with a B dollars in security assistance for Israel. And it was not the first time she has voted in favor of sending money for universal health care for white Israelis and for bombs and surveillance technology for everybody else. Voting to fund U.S. imperialism in Israel is not an outlier that reflects just a misunderstanding of what Israel really is on Jasmine Crockett's part. Unfortunately, the reality is worse. In April 2024, she voted in favor of a $95 billion foreign aid package that included military assistance for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. All the countries that are proxies of the US that are involved in imperialist aggression or outright war against the so called enemies of the US that have actually never done anything to this country or the people in it other than to be opposed to U.S. hegemony and neoliberal economic policies that destroy stability for working class and poor people through privatization of public services and laws that prioritize profit and corporate rights over people and human rights. Ms. Crockett supports arming all of them against the will of the people here and in those countries, and against the interests of truth, justice, and respect for the sovereignty of other nations and their people, in upholding the imperialist and, quite frankly, white supremacist ideology of the US government, in attacking these nations based on their capitalist, racist lies. But because people in this country don't like to read, and too many who say they want to change this system refuse to read and understand history and the theory that comes from it, we keep missing all of the guilty parties responsible for the state of chaos in this world today. Reading history and understanding the theory it informs helps us have much more clarity on who all of our enemies are. And additionally, theory helps us identify the key structures of power, not just individuals, not just groups of people, but structures, how they're connected, who the primary decision makers and players are within, how they're organized, and where they are most vulnerable. This is the map of organizing for social change that theory helps to chart. From this map comes the strategy and tactics that move spontaneous or individual outrage or outrage at an individual issue into organized, calculated, strategic action to challenge the system that produces these conditions. We are responding to the individual conditions right now. We are not responding to the system that created all of it. So, for example, people are rightfully upset at the brutality that's wholly illegal being carried out by ICE right now. It's horrifying. It really is horrifying. And it's horrifyingly illegal that the current regime controlling DHS and ICE issued a memo in May of last year saying that ICE agents have the authority to go door to door looking for immigrants to kidnap, detain. Don't want to get the station in trouble. But the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, you know, that piece of paper that these people said all this time for decades they were so deeply committed to, along with the Bible that ain't none of them read. They say the Constitution that they claim they love says that individuals have a right to not be subjected to, quote, unreasonable searches and seizures, end quote. That's the Fourth Amendment, and generally requires a warrant issued by, and the language in the Constitution is exactly this, quote, neutral and detached magistrate, a judge, based on probable cause to enter a private home. The ICE memo allows agents to use what are called administrative warrants, and that is really just a form that exists within the Department of Homeland Security to enter homes without a judicial warrant. That stupid piece of paper, it's the form I-205. That piece of paper is the equivalent of a sign on the break room door to wash your cups and not leave them in the sink, because administrative warrants are internal documents generated by ICE officials themselves, not by a judge, and they have never been sufficient for legal entry into a private home. These people really do think that just because they want a thing to be so, it is going to be so, regardless of what they have been telling us settled law says. So if they believe that, why do they believe that? Well, that's because that's how they've governed the entire time. Sure, they pass laws that say they can't do this thing. And then when they feel like doing that thing because it's going to benefit them in a material way, they basically look at that law and say, yeah, we don't care. And we're just going to do this thing. And you're going to let us do it. And usually the law lets them do it. And even if the law says they can't, somehow they still find a way to get what they want. Now, many people are rightfully outraged that the agents and representatives of this regime would all of a sudden not care about their precious Constitution anymore and blatantly violate the law, as they clearly always intended to do. And they know full well they were planning to do it, because why issue a memo saying you can do a thing if the thing was always done? They knew it wasn't done before. They knew it was illegal. So that's why they issued the memo to say, I know what the law says, I know what the Constitution says, but we're saying go ahead and kick them doors in. We'll worry about the lawsuits when this regime is over. That really is the attitude. The problem is the illegality of this regime is where people stop. This regime. While the violence committed against people being kidnapped by these goons is horrendous and an escalation from the way immigration was inhumanely done by every administration in the past, it is not really that different from what we've been experiencing before from previous regimes, just in different contexts. Let me tell you what I mean. Aside from the history that we started with at the top of this show that sounded almost exactly like what is going on in the streets right now, think about the way colleges and universities responded to the pro-Palestine, anti-genocide, anti-Zionist protests on campuses since October 2023. Think about the way protests against racist police terrorism have been violently suppressed throughout the entire history of this country. But okay, for your own memory, think back to 2015. Okay? How about the brutal destruction of what may have been the largest organized protest against capitalism, at least in my lifetime, that was Occupy Wall Street? Every one of the presidential regimes that unleashed local and federal law enforcement on those movements were Democrats. Republicans came along and were like, yeah, let's keep doing that. We like the way y'all did it. But here's a different spin on it. But Democrats unleashed that repression on the people. The repression of Palestinian and pro Palestinian students across the country over the last 2 years was carried out by Biden and Harris. Students were expelled from school, denied graduation, or outright detained by ICE and deported for opposing genocide. But remember, Jasmine Crockett and the Democrats call Israel an ally, right along with the Republicans. But the same U.S. politicians were not allies to their own constituents when they were doing the Israelis' bidding in criminalizing students and the masses, demanding an end to genocide. So is the problem we're facing with ICE today solely about Trump and these new ICE agents? Or is the problem much bigger? Is it a bigger systemic issue that involves every institution in this society that will do whatever those in power tell them to do to shut us up when we threaten their status quo? That's the problem. Without understanding theory, you will never get to even asking that question because you stay stuck on getting rid of the latest and most visible contradiction while ignoring all the ones in the shadows you can't immediately see. Analyzing the problems we face through the lens of theory helps a group of people from different backgrounds, life experiences, and even social statuses develop a shared framework and vocabulary to understand and communicate complex ideas efficiently and build a cohesive strategy. Group study is key. This is why organizations do group study. Everybody who comes to an organization doesn't believe the same thing. We don't have the same understanding about the same thing. People come into anti imperialist, anti capitalist organizations not really understanding what capitalism is. Well, that is why we have internal study about these topics. We have group reading. We have group discussions about what we read and study. And that is how we develop a shared understanding, a shared vocabulary, and we can get together and work on a shared cohesive strategy. Through this approach, clear goals are developed along with the strategies and tactics to achieve them. When a movement's goals are not clearly defined, by a deep analysis of the real problem, they're easily co opted. Demands are watered down into insufficient reforms that leave the core system intact. And a solid theoretical foundation helps the movement hold its line, distinguishes allies from adversaries, and remains focused on its long term goals. This is why large demonstrations like the No Kings marches face so much criticism from people like me, from established organizers and activists. The demands of those rallies were muddled, unclear, and provided no pathway to answers to the core issues facing this society today. First, there's no king in this country. So, what do you mean, no kings? But there is a dictatorship of finance capital and bloodthirsty capitalists at the top of every industry and in Europe, in this country and in Europe, who are invested in the repression that they have grown over the years. Getting rid of Trump is a good emotional message. And of course, he does need to go away. But once he's gone, and there will be a time when he is no longer president, what will the No Kings folks do about J.D. Vance, Stephen Miller, Mike Pompeo, Kristi Noem, and the like? Well, what are they going to do about them? But more important than those folks, what are they going to do about the Jeff Bezoses, Elon Musks, the Adelsons, Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, Joe Lonsdale, Stephen Cohen, Nathan Gettings, Bernard Arnault, Ronald Lauder? Oh, you don't even know who those people are, do you? Uh-huh. They'll continue to control the industries that support Trump's policies and US imperialist policies pushed by both parties when he's gone. They are currently supporting those policies through their various industries. You're just going to have to look them up to find out what industries they do represent, because that's a part of understanding theory too, knowing who you are fighting and what institutions they are connected to. You may have their products in your home. At the last one, I know some of you do. Some of them are in your purses and your pockets right now. What did No Kings have to say about them? Theory teaches us to look beyond the figurehead and see who is supporting, pushing propaganda for, shaping their products or marketing to amplify, and using the money you spend on those products to fund politicians and policies that are destroying people's lives. Because we will still have to deal with those people and their continued impacts on our lives once the alleged king is gone. You feel me? Theory also connects today's work with the history of people's struggles. And I don't understand how you can want to be an organizer today and not want to know the history of organized struggle that leads us to this point. Helping today's organizers learn from the past, because theory is the condensed lessons of past struggles, is something that organizers today cannot get away from if we're serious about what it is we say we want to do. The analysis of the systemic issues of the past and people's responses to them is an integral part of the analysis of the problems being addressed today. There is no way to conduct an accurate analysis of the present issues without understanding the history that preceded and contributed to them. You mean to tell me you didn't know anything about the history that we started this show with? And you think you understand what's going on right now and why it's happening the way it is and why these people are doing the particular things they're doing in the particular way they're doing them? You don't. You do not. Because you don't understand that history we started with and the theory that comes out of that history about white supremacy and the violence connected to it and why they carry it out. You think that what is going on today is solely attributable to Donald Trump, when it's not. It is attributable to this nation, what it is, how it was founded, and the ideals that it grew on. If we actually read and learn history, like the history of how the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, the Black Liberation Army, the Weathermen, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Sojourners for Truth and Justice, if we learn how they organized, what they believed, how they were attacked and destroyed, we wouldn't be as confused today about who to trust, who to organize with, and who to stay away from, and how to stay alert to infiltration, among other lessons on how to protect ourselves from state attack. We would also learn some very, 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 very valuable lessons about how to conduct ourselves with each other inside our organizations, because unresolved and festering internal conflicts can do as much to destroy an organization from the inside as an agent infiltrating it can. History shows us this time and time again. And the resolution of internal conflicts for the safety and security and integrity of the organization, that is the theory that comes out of knowing the history of what unresolved internal conflicts can do to damage an organization. By studying the theories that emerged from the Haitian Revolution, the Paris Commune, the Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, Black liberation movements, peasant movements in Latin America, and other anti-colonial struggles, organizers learn what tactics worked, what tactics did not work, how movements were betrayed, how hierarchies reemerged, and other issues and questions that give insight to us into how to build more resilient structures. We cannot fully and effectively answer the question, what is to be done about what's going on now, without understanding the history of revolutionary theory, which comes from what people did in response to what was going on then. Without this, organizers today spend a whole lot of valuable time reinventing the wheel, repeating past mistakes that previous organizers documented so we wouldn't have to repeat them, building structures with little protection from both external infiltration and internal division and collapse, and ultimately end up tilting at windmills with no direction, no strategy, no real goal. This is where my resolute position on not organizing with the right wing in this country comes from. I don't know every bit of history. No one knows all history. But I know enough of the history of this country to be convinced that whatever two things a MAGA or an alt-right or a white Christian nationalist and I agree on, like Medicare for all, and eliminating war, ending war. Their opposition to my very humanity is never going to turn out good for me and the people I organize with and about. History proves the theory that the central role and racial the theory that the central role of racial resentment among much of conservative America is a nearly insurmountable barrier for any real unity between us and them. Racism and racial anxiety are key tools in the modern conservative electoral strategy. And we have talked on this show about how the moral majority organized itself to become the powerful juggernaut that it is. The left sees addressing systemic racism and discrimination in general among all marginalized groups as a moral imperative for what we do. This is the single biggest fault line. It is. Any alliance that requires us to soft pedal racial justice will fail. They all have. And too often, members of the left have been willing to soft pedal racism, to cozy up to the right for social media platform growth and bigger YouTube checks, while the people who are the targets of the racism and the racist violence, the xenophobia and the homo and transphobia and the ableism and the ageism, yeah, we get more marginalized by their new right-wing friends, and then the so-called folks on the left start telling us to shut up. And in the end, none of us on the left gets anything good, but the right gets a boost from support from the left. History shows us this over and over again. But because we don't like to read and we don't think theory is important, we keep falling for this stupid red-brown alliance lie. And we keep ending up exactly where we are right now, with the right coming into power and the right basically saying, hey, thank you, idiotic leftists or progressives or whatever you want to call yourself, for believing that you could work with us on the two things we agreed on. Now, open the door. It's ice. Oh my gosh, we have so much work to do before us, dear friends and listeners and viewers. It is I feel like I have been holding in this frustration about people's about the about the anti-intellectualism that has been fomented among our people in this country in so many ways. Just aside from the direct attacks on public school curriculum, the direct attacks on CRT and teaching history as it actually happened, to include all of the racial atrocities. It's not just that, it is also the way this system uses celebrity as a buffer class to dumb us down, to not pay attention to things that we should be paying attention to because they do impact us. We get all excited about our latest celebrity, with their, I'm just going to say it. We get all excited about Beyonce and the Cowboy Carter, and everybody's got the fans and the where them fans at and all that kind of stuff. And everybody ignored what she was peddling: Americanism in the midst of a genocide. She's sitting on a white horse with a white blonde wig, with a white cowboy hat, with a red, white, and blue sash, with a gigantic American flag. And y'all paid all that money for that woman's concerts, and she didn't say nothing about genocide. She didn't say anything about local police training with the IDF and coming back here and putting their knees on black and brown folks' necks. That is the role of celebrity in this capitalist, imperialist, settler colonial system. This system uses everything at its disposal to distract us from what it is doing, including convincing us that our real problem is those immigrants over there. It has been wild to me to see African descended people celebrate, cheer, call ICE on people, talking about their ADOS and FBA and descendant of slaves and they're Americans and these people are coming here stealing black jobs. People believe this. They are easily convinced by this because they don't read. They do not know the history of struggle of our people. They don't think theory is important. So they literally do not know that they're being lied to by the propagandists for the state. And they are literally believing and living the white supremacist lies about immigrants and about themselves because they ain't American. Honey, if we were American, we wouldn't still be having to fight for the right to vote. Let's be serious here. I'm not in a position to tell you what you should and should not do. And I really want to get away from giving people advice because, you know, sometimes that's just energy wasted. What I will say is that if you are serious about organizing, you do need to read. You need to study and understand history, and you better know some theory. Because if you don't, what you're out here doing is doing your own personal TikTok video. You're not organizing for changing anything. Because if you don't know who you are fighting, why you are fighting it, you don't know how to fight them. And if you don't know any of that, you are not going to win anything. That's all the time I have tonight for Darker Than Blue. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Jackie Lukeman. Stay tuned for Garland Nixon on News Views and you all online on video, Black Liberation Media and Facebook. Stick around. Thanks so much. A luta continua. The struggle continues. But if we keep staying close to this history and this theory, Victoria asserta. Victory is certain. Peace. All right, y'all. Thank you for watching. Let me get that. All right, close that up. Just a few minutes. Sharing a few additional things with y'all. Oh, what's going on? Oh, I don't know what's happening. Okay, there we go. I don't know what's going on. Sometimes I don't know what's going on with this thing. I wanted to make sure. I don't know what's happening there. Stop that. Weird things are happening with this computer. I wanted to make sure I finish this discussion because I'm sick and tired of having this damn conversation with people. When I'm talking to people and they're, "Oh, I'm interested in BAP. I want to join BAP and I want to do great, cool, yeah. This is what we do. This is how we are structured. We have internal study groups. And as soon as I start talking about the reading and the study groups, they're like, "Oh, why are we doing all that? Why we ain't doing this, that, and the third?" And I'm like, okay, In my mind, what I'm saying is, first of all, you came to us, and this is what we are doing. This is how we are doing what we are doing. If you want to participate in what we are doing, you are more than welcome to. But this is what we are doing. If you want to be a part of us, fantastic. But this is what we are doing. So that means if you are going to be a part of us, this is what you going to do. And we're not dictators about it. We just understand theory that informs how we work. So no, we're not going to just have people come in off the street and all of a sudden start telling us that we need to do things in a different way from what the way we do things just because they said so. And that usually is the situation that a lot of folks are dealing with. That happens. And what happens, I think what happens is 2020 saw a very large uptick in organizational activity, as it should have. And what 20 maybe 2017, and I think 2023 also, probably no, 2022 maybe, but there were a couple of years where, something catastrophic happened very publicly. People were outraged, came to the streets, heard about BAP, and said, I want to be involved in BAP. Cool. And I think every organization experiences this. I don't think this is unique to us. I think every serious revolutionary organization experiences this. People who want to get involved, who want to join an organization, but they know nothing about organizing, and they don't understand that organizing is not a thing you do on the weekend. Organizing is not a hobby. Organizing is a science. So, because organizing is a science, it is carried out through processes, strategies, tactics. Organizing is not just pulling together a rally. Everything that goes on behind the scenes, the day before and the day after, and every day after, that is organized. The rally itself, great. That is how you raise awareness. That's how you present yourself and the line and your line to people. That's how you talk about the issue to the biggest number of people that you possibly can. Right? And that's great, absolutely needed. But what do you do with those people when they become interested? What do you do with the information that you have shared? Do you connect it with other things that people are experiencing? Do you take those people into your organization and teach them how to organize? Or do you just have those people on a list where you're sending them an email and telling them, hey, the next protest is at this time on this date, show up, let's be the biggest event in the history of whatever, right? So, and I apologize, y'all, for not being able to look at the comments because my tablet didn't want to act right on my teleprompter, so I could not see. So I'm just looking at your comments. So as Mexi, thank you for this comment. I tried to organize and join BAP, but it didn't feel like my region has its act together. No one cares about the West Coast because apparently Black people don't live there. Well, we have a really good. I'm wondering where you are in on the West. If you're in SoCal, I'm not sure. But my email is chair@blackallianceforpeace.com. Send me an email. And let's talk about this. Let's talk about it, because this, you are on the ground there where you are in California. I'm not. I am very interested in hearing what you have to say about what's going there, because if there's something that we can help with, we want to help. We absolutely want to help. We want to help people do the work that they want to do, but we can't help if we don't know there's a problem, and we can't help if we don't know what the problem is. So let's figure that out. Thank you for for posting that. Oh, in Portland. Okay. Now it makes sense. Portland. Yep, I get that. Yeah, Portland is weird, but email me anyway. Yeah, that's it is. It is. You're right. People don't think black folks live, but we gonna work it out. Email me and let's get into it. So, okay, I and I'm and look, y'all, I'm in a position where I do have to be a little bit more careful about the things I say now because I am the chairperson of the coordinating committee for BAP. So I'm the, leadership and all this kind of stuff. So there's a whole bunch of crap that I want to say that I would have said last year that I have to be a lot more mature and not say now. And sometimes I just have to find a better way to say things that need to be said. So I'm trying. I'm working on it. So okay, so let me talk more about this whole red brown alliance bullshit because I think I'm legit pissed off that since 2016 white folks on the so-called left made the biggest motherfucking deal about organizing with the alt-right, people like Mike Chernovich and I can't remember the other freak's name, but it was a bunch of these right-wing online folks who, as soon as they said, yeah, Bernie Sanders is okay because I support Medicare for all, poor white people need health care too. And all of these folks on the left thought, you know, we need numbers, we need power, we can win if we organize with the right. I'm serious. They did. They did. If you weren't around online during that time, you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But if you were, you understand that psycho period of time. And I really want you to understand, folks, the importance of people on the so-called left aligning with the alt-right for the sole purpose of getting Medicare for all. That is why they did it. And in the end, what happened was the alt right got legitimized by the progressives and the white left that became chummy with them. And the alt rights and the progressives and the white left started shitting on us. And you're wondering how we got to this point? White progressives and white leftists fucking helped. That's how we got to this point. And that's something that I have not seen a whole lot of people talk about. And I know that, people are like, of course you're gonna talk about it, Jackie, with your petty ass. Well, yeah, yeah. Because I recognized, um, I recognized from the beginning that when somebody says they hate black people, they hate gay people, they hate trans people, I take them at their word. And I don't care if they want Medicare for all too. As long as I know that they hate me because of who I am, Medicare for all ain't gonna keep me from being dead because of them. Right. And we tried to explain this. We tried to explain this to the whites on the left. And we got cussed out by them. Oh, we got all these articles and the think pieces from these white left publications about why class is the primary contradiction. Race is not that important. We can solve the racism problem once we deal with the classism problem. And here the fuck we are. Exactly where we have been before in this country, because white people too often will choose whiteness over justice for themselves, because choosing justice for themselves means they have to align themselves with the most marginalized, and that's us, and they ain't fitting to do that. Some, yes. I know we got to go, not all white people. Okay, yeah. Yeah, but we don't have enough John Browns. That's why I had to write that book. That's why I had to write We Need John Brown Christians. I think it's fantastic that the churches are being confronted now more my oh and that's what I forgot to do tonight. The pastor, the new senior minister at my church, Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ, is out at Gallery Place at the Ice Out protest speaking. That if you are a person of faith right now, and especially if you are the leader of a congregation, that's where you need to be right now, out in these streets. You need to be lifting up your voice for the marginalized and the oppressed. Should have been doing it all along. Well, he's new. So, but I'm so happy that the churches are being confronted now. I'm so thankful that I belong to a church that has always been liberation theology focused. But understand what had to happen for all of these people to get involved in anything. Just had these huge No Kings protests in the midst of the genocide, and they didn't mention the genocide at all. Not at all. Didn't, when they mentioned Ukraine, it was to support Ukraine. Okay? So we have all of this lack of clarity. We have all of this collusion with the right, all of this collusion with the empire on the white left, every whatever it is, whatever the spectrum is. Way too much collaboration with the right and with the empire. And people are seriously confused about how did we get here? Are you kidding? We never were not in this place. If you know the history of this country, you know that this is exactly where this is where we have always been. Y'all ain't been here. This shit ain't been on your streets. It hasn't been in your neighborhoods. It didn't come knocking on your door, dragging your fathers and brothers and sons and nephews, and then your mothers and your nieces and your aunties and your grandmas off to prison for simple possession. While the college kid gets caught with 5 grams and he gets probation. You see what I mean? This is where we've always been, where our people die in police custody waiting for the trial. Haven't even been convicted of anything. But we can't afford bail, so we have to sit in jail and die in custody waiting for trial. Or get stopped on the streets and executed on the sidewalk because I feared for my life. That's where we've always been. And what we're seeing now with ICE is the expansion of what was done to us imposed on other people. So when we're talking about how to fight this, we have to be clear that there is a segment of the American population that we cannot organize with. Their views are diametrically opposed to everything we're supposed to stand for, even if they agree with us on one or two things, right? Because when we're talking about the right wing in this country, and increasingly liberals are a part of the right wing, they are center right, the Democratic Party is. They are not left. The Democratic Party is center right. The Republicans are far right fascist. They are authoritarian, far right authoritarian. The Democrats are center right. And increasingly they're sliding over to the far right. But we can't organize with the right because their core values are nowhere near ours. Like, okay, if you don't like the racism example, how about climate change? So for us, climate crisis is real. It is an existential threat. The reason so many young people today have the attitude they do about so much stuff is because of climate catastrophe, climate collapse that they know they will have to live through. A lot of us gonna die, like not from that, just because we're older, right? I've got more years. I am closer to the end of my life than I am to the beginning. Almost 60. I don't think I want to be here longer than 20 more years to see what it's going to look like. And most of us will not. Most of us are going to transition from this place. But millennials, our kids and our grandkids, they're the ones who are going to have to live in a climate decimated society. They are terrified and they are angry, and they should be. But what do you think they have in common with folks on the right and Democrats too, who are acting as if climate change isn't a big deal? It's not something they have to do anything serious about. And for the Republicans in particular, they don't have to do anything about it because they don't think it's real. What do we have in common with them? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Whatever we can agree with these people on this one issue, once we get past that one issue, we're going to go right back to being at their throats or them being at our throats over everything else. Right? So then what about, obviously, social issues, LGBTQ plus rights, abortion, secularism, right? Like, as a liberation theology Christian, I'm not interested in you believing what I believe, and I am not interested in what you believe. I like talking about my faith because I think it's pretty fascinating how deeply manipulated it is, and how even the believers of the faith don't understand that we believe the manipulation of the faith and not the faith itself. That's the whole point of the book that I wrote. Just we think we understand Christianity. We don't even understand. Again, the importance of learning history, reading, and theory. We think we understand Christianity. We don't. Not even Christians. We don't understand that the text we're reading has been so deeply manipulated that we're reading a bunch of shit that's not even true. Not even a reflection of the original text. So the original meaning out the window. We don't know that. We don't know that because we don't read and we don't study. Right? But what about LGBTQ plus rights? I don't care what your personal opinion is about how somebody else exists in the world, how somebody else presents that. I don't care. I don't care. I don't understand why anybody else does. The only thing that matters to me is, does that person have a right to move through this world and this society without being discriminated against or hurt by somebody who just doesn't agree with them, just because they don't like the way they are, who they are, how they exist? Because nobody has a right to do that. You don't have to like me. I don't care that you dislike me, but you're not going to keep me from doing what I need to do for myself. That's the issue. You're not going to keep me from being able to move into a place to live. You're not going to keep me from having a job. You're not going to keep me from enjoying a free movement in society, however the fuck I want to present myself in society. As long as I'm not hurting you or anybody else, why should you care? Republicans don't believe this. Conservatives don't believe this. White Christian nationalists don't believe this. How do we find any kind of common ground with these people? How do we meet these people who want to keep people from being who they are, who feel like they have a right to control how other people exist and to punish people for existing in a way that they do not personally approve? What kind of unity do we ever have with people like that? None. None. So this idea of organizing with the right, knowing that the right feels the way they do about LGBTQIA and disabled people and older people and progressives and leftists and every brown why where do you think How do you think organizing with those people is going to benefit the people that they hate? That's the question I asked when I wrote that article. And what happened? And what did the white progressives do? They called on their right-wing white friends to come and attack. Uh-huh. So then there is always the issue of the role of government, because these folks, these right wing folks, they're liars. There's no truth in them. They're liars. They're professional liars. They're pathological liars. Everything they think is a lie. You cannot have an honest, true, and decent thought in your head if you really believe that only white people inherited a country that they stole through genocide and developed through slavery. Come on, these people know that. Why I don't, and I also don't understand why we're still trying to appeal to their morality. What morality? At the top of the show, I talked about all of this history, but I also included some of the things white politicians said about why they did what they did. They were very clear. And they weren't just speaking for themselves, they were speaking for white American society. Why do any of you think that has changed? Like, with the exception of the white folks who are out in the streets in places like Minneapolis and Texas and in DC and in Florida, with the exception of those white folks, all those white people who are sitting at home cheering on ICE, the way those white people in the history I started the show with talked, that is the way these folks today, that's exactly what they think. You cannot reason with these people. Stop trying. Go organize with the people who are out in the streets, who are willing to fight. And I'm saying that equally to us as much as I'm saying it to them, because when this is over, they better not go home, because that's what has happened in the past. The one thing they're upset about gets them out into the street. They get really, really involved in that. And then when that blows over and dies down, well, okay, nothing else to. No, no. History and theory should let you know that this issue is not the issue. And this president is not the problem. It is systemic. And there are people around who have been fighting this systemic issue for way longer than I was even concerned about anything. So let me go get with them. That's the kind of internal conversations that need to be happening among the white folks who are in the streets now. Those folks who are staying home, making the shitty comments on the videos, and don't pay any attention to them. Stop trying to argue with those people. Stop arguing with those people. You cannot reason with them. They don't have any morality to appeal to. They are the enemy. Designate them as such and move on, please, because we got way more stuff to do than to waste a whole bunch of time arguing with them. And I'm talking to myself right now. So then we've got the role of government that these folks, they claim they want small government, no regulation, which they always, when they come into power, they always get rid of all the regulations. And then the Democrats come into power and maybe re-implement half of them, maybe. But the conservative solution to everything is usually deregulation and tax cuts for the rich. But then the left doesn't say anything about the right's love of big government for repression of people. And why don't they? Because the Democrats like it too. The Democrat didn't we just talk about how all those Democratic administrations destroyed people's movements in this country with brutal police violence? Democrats love a big repressive government just as much as the Republicans do. So when we talk about organizing with the right, I mean, there is I have no quarter with Republicans and the alt-right and MAGA and the far right, none. And a good 85% of the time, I ain't got too much to say to Democrats at this point either. But that's me. That's me. I tend to take Walter Rodney's advice about academics and apply it to liberals. Walter Rodney said that until they prove otherwise, academics are the enemy of the people. I feel the same way about Democrats and liberals in general. Until they prove otherwise, they are enemies of the people. So then, we have this reactionary response to what's going on. And I mean reactionary as in we're in a position to respond to an impetus rather than implement forward thinking plans to grow the movement, advance the struggle. And that creates an environment where everything is treated like an emergency, where there are regular internal and external fires to put out, and organizers become susceptible to burnout. All of our energy is focused on addressing problems and crises that the lack of theoretical clarity created the space for. So, the utility of theory in the crucible of revolutionary organizing today is that it helps us understand that struggle is long and cyclical, with periods of advance and retreat, and not something one does only on a Saturday when people gather for a protest. Again, protest is great, it's necessary, it's needed. I think it's a protest is a good indication of a people's willingness to participate in a functional democracy, even when the functional democracy doesn't exist, like in this country, right? People's protest, I think, is always a good sign, unless you know that protest is backed by the US. That's another conversation. But protest is important. But protest can't be the only thing we do, because protest is literally the response to something awful that the state is doing. Protest is getting the people together, raising the issue in front of the people to tell them this is happening, and getting people who know about it together to amplify that message even farther, even louder, even bigger. That's a reaction to something. What is our plan to circumvent these moves? What is our plan to build alternative systems so that we are not so deeply impacted by these moves? What are our strategies to be more proactive in meeting the enemy at the point of us knowing what they're about to do? Right? Because they sure as fuck know that about us. These are not things that are theoretical. They're not guesses. Well, what you think theoretical is. These are guesses. Understanding our need to know theory also comes out of understanding that our enemy is clear on this shit. They are organized. Yeah, they have money. Yeah, they have money. But that's not the reason. That is not the reason. They have and have maintained power the way they have. They have maintained power and have amassed so much because they are clear on their goals and their purposes. They may not like each other. White people don't all love each other. Conservatives do not all love each other. They do not all agree on every single thing. They don't. But they are clear on their goal of maintaining and growing power. They are clear on who they want to have power over. They're clear on what that power looks like, and they are clear on what they are willing to do to everybody else, including some of their own who get in their way, to get it. They're clear on that. We're not. And they're clear on it, not because they all agree, but because they know the history and they have their own theories on how they do what they do. I don't understand how in the world we think we're going to fight these people and win when we don't know anything about them because we don't read. And we do know everything about them because history is full of their bullshit. You're confused about why these particular people are doing what they do? How? How are you confused that this is what they're doing when given the chance? When this is what they've always done when given the chance? Come on, y'all. So what we do when we are studying history and theory is we are helping ourselves maintain a long-term perspective. Understanding history and theory helps us not to be disillusioned from expecting an immediate victory just because we're really passionate and angry about this, just because we had a really dope teach-in, just because we had, a demonstration with 1 million people. Not understanding the history of struggle and the theory that comes from that history, that struggle against a system is a long process. Peaks and valleys, advances and retreats, wins and losses, and lessons throughout for those who would continue the struggle, right? So in this microwave, instant gratification focused, attention span truncated society like the US, understanding the longue durée of revolutionary struggle is vital for people who are organizing to fight it. We have to be clear that this is not, when we say we may not win in our lifetime, that's not hyperbole. We understand that is the nature of the struggle. We can't predict when the victory will come, just like we can't predict when the spark will happen that will finally get a good amount of people in this country interested in doing something other than, beyond, more organized than what is happening now, right? Because I know we think this is the spark, but I don't think so. I'd love to be wrong. We'll see. But I'm looking, I'm watching, I'm observing. So, theory also helps organizers learn that the state and the ruling class, like I said, have their own theories and playbooks for maintaining control and amassing and keeping and growing power. Theory teaches the methods of co-optation, divide and rule, repression, information control, and manipulation that they use to discredit, weaken, ultimately destroy people's movements being waged against their oppressive, exploitative, imperialist power. Studying historical revolutionary theory helps organizers anticipate and identify these moves and develop counter strategies against them. Studying and being clear on theory also informs organizers that our mandate is not just to destroy the old, unjust, and unequal world, but our mandate, our bigger mandate, is to build a new one that is beneficial and supportive for all. Theory helps us develop a vision of what that new society and world should look like. Revolutionary organizers have to answer the questions for a future society about how decisions will be made, who will make them, how will the people participate in the process, how will resources be allocated, what will the social contract between the state and the people be, what will the relationship with other states, other groups, other peoples be. Theory helps us grapple with these questions to arrive at answers that meet the needs of the people, helping organizers create a vision for the next phase in the struggle. Without this vision, a movement can win an isolated one issue battle, which is great, which is fine. We need every win we can get. But beyond that battle, so theory helps us have an idea of what to do with that singular victory, to grow it, to expand it, to lead to a restoration or not a restoration, but to lead to the establishment of a bigger fight, or to contribute to the expansion of a fight that is bigger. Because if we don't, if we only focus on, hey, we won a raise in the minimum wage, our battle is won, let's go back home, what have you changed in the system? Nothing. Theory is not just for professional intellectuals and scientists. It's not. Academic and scientific theory exists, yes, and can be pretty esoteric for lay people. But revolutionary theory is meant to be a tool for the people. Revolutionary theory is for you. Revolutionary history is for you because revolutionary history was made by us. Why wouldn't you want to learn about what your ancestors, your people did? I'm very confused about that. Theory should be studied collectively. And we just talked about why. Debated openly in accessible language and grounded in the material conditions of the people affected. So the goal of studying theory is not to create like an elite class of revolutionary theorists. We're not trying to create a cadre of revolutionary theorists here, but to equip every organizer with the power of analysis. If you look at the thumbnail for this show, I put on the thumbnail a bunch of books that I have read. Not all of them, but a bunch of books that when I read them just blew my fucking mind. And at every point changed the way I understood something about this system. These books, learning these things helped me see myself in a different ooh, wait a minute. So I'm almost I'm almost willing not to give up on ADOS and FBA just yet because if we could get them in a room and force them to read, that's not going to work. I'm sorry, it was just a hopeful thought, but learning the history that your people made, like how do you not read or how do you read Asata's autobiography and not feel a sense of deep pride as an African woman? Like she badass in every sense of the word. How do you learn about the Sojourner Truth Society and not feel a deep and abiding respect for those early African communist women? How do you read Claudia Jones and read what she without like I really feel like if we spent more time reading revolutionary history, the history of what our people have done to fight for liberation in this country and around the world, we wouldn't have a problem with identity and self-esteem as a people and this weird idea of, well, we can't be unified. What are you talking about? How I don't understand how people are still having these conversations about how black people aren't unified, but I only don't understand them because I love history and theory. And loving history and theory forces it gets me to love my people. So mm, so when was it Fidel or was it Che who said that a revolutionary is driven by a great love of their people? That's what reading revolutionary history and understanding theory does. My people fought this system with a courage and a conviction and a spine that half the motherfuckers I know today don't have. But if they read that history, they would. If they had that example, if they were able to internalize that example of, you know what, if an enslaved person like Nat Turner could do what he did, ain't no way I can't do this little bit that's in front of me to do. Do you see what I mean? I hope this is making sense, because I'm feeling like, and I know most people are too, we are at a precipice right now. We are on the precipice of the end of this empire. And the fall is going to be hideous. It is going to be awful. It is going to be violent. It's going to be awful. It's going to be just, it is going to be something we have never seen before, and some of us will not survive. I think that is absolutely true. But what's on the other side of that? This is what theory and reading and understanding history gets you to thinking, because you always know, if you read history, there's always something on the other side of whatever this is. What is on the other side of this precipice? Once we pass this period, what is going to be on the other side? We had better start asking and answering that question, because you know who have already, they have already written the answers down and have published the findings? The right and the Democrats. And from now on, I just want you to understand, when I say the right, I mean the Democrats too. They are already very clear on what they want on the other side. They don't care about this. They are not concerned. They are not concerned about the things they are doing. They're not ashamed. They're not embarrassed. They're not going to backtrack. They're going to stick to it. They're going to stand on, this is the hill they're going to die on, and they're going to take some of us with them. And some of us, like some of these Negroes who are out there with ICE, and some of these coconuts that are out there with ICE, they're going to go with them too. And that they're going to have to. Some of our people are not going to be saved. What of the rest of us? What do we say we want to be on the other side of this moment? You haven't asked yourself? You haven't asked anybody? Nobody around you has asked what comes after this? That's why theory is important. That's why history is important. That is why you must read, beloved. Because if you're not asking yourself that question right now, we fucked. Because the people who have answered the question, they are ready. They are ready to erect what they want on the other side of it. We are not. We're not even ready to fight what they're going to do, because we don't know, because we don't think theory is important. So, for folks who insist that rather than focus on theory, the current crises are so urgent that we only have time for action right now, theory itself reveals that action without strategy, direction, and focused organization is easily sidetracked, co opted, and crushed. But theory without action is also useless. So the relationship between the two, theory and action, inseparable. You can't have one without the other. So when people come into our organizations and we say, before you get in front of anybody and say and do anything, we want you to read these books, participate in these internal studies, and people are like, I'm not doing all that. Why could, well, you know what? Listen, if you want to go out there without a direction, without a plan, without strategy, without a line, without clear talking points, help yourself. But you're not going to do it in this organization. You're not going to misrepresent us. You're not going to sidetrack the strategy and the tactics and the organization and the discipline and the knowledge that we are cultivating in this thing. And this is not to say that this organization is better than any other organization. This is the attitude that every serious organization has to take. Serious, revolutionary organization. If it's a bridge club, I don't give a shit what y'all do. If it's 50501, don't give a shit what y'all do, because y'all ain't gonna do shit that changes nothing. But us, I don't I think that it is noteworthy. And listen, this is not ever something, this is not a brag. This is not, it is not accidental that we were involved in early support for the formation of the AES while we were telling people, calm down, let's not declare it anything until they declare themselves whatever it is. But let's just watch carefully and make sure that we are keeping watch on imperialism and seeing what the US is going to do in response. And here we are watching the Alliance of Sahel states both bloom and grow and turn things around in their countries, and also come under increasing attacks from the empire, because theory informed us that that was exactly what was going to happen. Why did theory inform it? Because history showed us that that is how it happens. That's what happens. What is it? The Oh gosh, I just had something in my mind. It just went right out the window. Um, so you know, we don't, as organizers, as serious revolutionaries, but I do a lot of I told you so. I, Jacqueline Lukman, because I'm petty, and I have a right to be petty, because I've been through some shit, and I can be petty. I'm owed. But as organizers, as a part of the strategy, as a part of the tactics, as a part of the outreach, we don't stand in front of people like, I told you, motherfuckers. I might be thinking it, but I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. What I will do is bring up the instances, the examples that are happening now that point to the organizing we've been doing, like the AES support for one, but also the FIFA thing. Now, look, again, not a brag. It's honestly not a brag. But when the North South Project for People's Centered Human Rights was established by our comrade Ajamu Baraka, and they started this campaign, this petition against FIFA, because of the US supporting the genocide in Palestine. Whole bunch of people. I'm sharing the thing. People are emailing me, texting me back, calling me, seeing me. What's a petition gonna do? And you know, you explain to people, listen, petitions outside of the context of, you know, local electoral politics, they do raise awareness. They help people understand there is an issue that you need to focus on, and this is it. Did you know about this? In getting people to sign the petition, you're doing outreach and you're explaining the topic, the issue to the people. That's how you get people to sign the petition, right? That is quick and dirty political education outreach 101. That is organizing. That really is. So people still, I don't, what's a petition gonna do? Okay, either you're gonna sign the shit or not. I explained to you what it is. Sign it or don't. Whatever. But stop arguing for your ignorance, because that's all that So fast forward, I don't know how many, what, a year, two, whatever, how long that, and now there is a massive boycott of FIFA, with, I think it's over 50,000 people now who have asked for refunds for their tickets, because people don't want to come here. They don't want to come here and get locked up by ICE. Like, fuck that. And now there are larger calls to move the World Cup games and to kick the U.S. and Israel out of FIFA and the Olympics. Now, am I going to sit here and say BAP started that? No, because that's ridiculous. That we didn't. The North South Project for People Centered Human Rights did not start. Like this situation is not where it is because of that petition. What is true, what is absolutely true, is that understanding history and following the roadmap that theory gave us let us know that we had to do something to raise the issue of the illegality and the illegitimacy of the United States in participating in these sporting events that are supposed to be international brotherhood kind of, yeah, because that's what they're supposed to be. The World Cup and the Olympics, yes, it's about sport, it's about competition, but it's also supposed to be about friendly relations with other countries, right? That's what it's supposed to be about. So how are you going to have a competition with genocidaires? And if you are going to eliminate Russia from the Olympics and other competitions because they defended themselves against Ukraine, how the fuck are you not going to kick out the US and Israel for actively carrying on a genocide, not just in Palestine, but also in Sudan and bombing the fuck out of Yemen and all these other places? So, okay, the greater call to address this issue doesn't exist because of what the North South Project for People-Centered Rights, People-Centered Human Rights did with that petition that they started a while ago, but because of our understanding of theory and how we get people involved in these issues. We knew that was what we had to do in order to raise this issue among our people. The fact that the call grew is a reflection of people also understanding the seriousness of the moment and the need to apply historical theory to their action to address what's going on today. Because petitions really do work to get people thinking about, I didn't know that was an issue. Let me look more into it. Right? So, no, there is no theory without practice. We don't tell people to read and study history and study theory just for the sake of knowing stuff. That's not what you need it in order to organize. But you really cannot effectively organize without theory. Can you organize? Sure, you can organize something, but what? I don't know. Because theory helps you determine what you are organizing, how you are going to do it, why you're doing it, who you're going to organize what. Okay, you get it. So if you're asking yourself in this historical moment whether you should be fighting against a single corrupt politician or fighting the political system that produces them, providing charity or building mutual aid as a challenge to the system's lack of provision, reacting to the latest crisis, or executing a long-term plan to dismantle the source of the crises, or some combination of all of that, then studying theory will not only help answer those questions for you. See, I can't tell you what you should do. You have to decide what you're going to do. And you are the one who's going to have to make that decision in here yourself right now. I can't do it for you. Because if I did it for you, you'd already be doing this shit. It's not a dictatorship here. Theory will also provide insight for you into what strategies worked in the past, what haven't, the most beneficial alliances to make, what to avoid, discipline required to stay committed through the peaks and valleys of struggle. Studying theory is not about replacing action with book clubs, as those who refuse to study theory claim. Yep, I've been told that too. It's also not about um uh um being an elite whatever. I constantly question what I think I know. And I'm always kind of excited when I find out, oh, I didn't completely understand all of that. I am always excited to know that, oh, I got something not quite right. I missed that detail. That makes a lot of difference. That is fascinating for me. I love that. And I think it's a wonderful thing when you are engaged in some very, very serious and emotionally and physically taxing work, but you're still excited about learning more about the thing that you're doing. I don't think we can win if we are closed to learning more stuff on how to win. I just I don't understand the anti intellectualism is going to do more damage to us than all of the other. I really I'm feeling that right now. But theory is a precious and important thing. Our history is a precious and important thing. We have we have fought giants. And though we have paid a high cost, we're still here fighting. That says something about what we know, just not about who we are, but it says a lot about what we know. The problem is what we know, too many of us now don't want to learn. Studying theory is about arming yourself for a long and difficult war for our liberation. Soldiers with no training can't fight a war, let alone win. In fact, I think it was Thomas Sankara who said that a soldier without political education is a potential criminal. A soldier without political education is a potential criminal. I don't know what else I need to say. I hope that the people who are in the streets right now in Minnesota, in Florida, in DC, in Maine, I think I heard earlier today that ICE is rampaging in Maine. I really hope in California, out in LA, I really hope that most of these people, because I know it's never going to be all. Also, oh yeah, also studying theory gives you a realistic view of what mobilizing and organizing the masses really looks like. When we say masses, we when in regard to organization, we're not talking about every single person, because no revolution has ever been engaged in by every single member of the working class and poor and the peasant class that needed to be involved. It never, never, never. And that is going to have to be okay with us. That we are going to have to be okay with continuing this battle with a good portion of the masses. What that size looks like, that's up to us. We are the ones who have to do the work of going out and meeting the masses. We cannot expect them to come to us. We have to go out to meet the masses where they are. When we say meeting the masses where we are not talking about validating any of their anti intellectual, celebrity focused, ahistorical, pro imperialist bullshit. No, that's not what we mean by meeting the people where they are in their ignorance and keeping them there and hanging out with them in there. That's not what we mean. What we mean is we are not sitting on the mountaintop like a what do you call a yogi or whatever? I don't know. Like a priest. We're not sitting on the mountaintop like a priest waiting for the people to come to us and kneel at our feet and ask us for the wisdom on how to fight. No, we have to go out to the people and bring the fight to them. That's what we have to do. That is what organization is. Guru, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. We have to bring this to them. And there are only so many of us. But imagine how our ancestors did it without the modern tools that we have today. How they were able to mobilize masses, do mass events where I was looking at a picture of and it's on the article that I wrote for Black Agenda Report. It's a picture of Stokely Carmichael. At the time, he was called Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, speaking to an enormous crowd of, I'm assuming, SNCC members and supporters, standing on some type of platform, no microphone, with a notepad in his hand, no electronics, no amplification, no microphone, no social media, no computer, no cell phone, no Instagram carousel. A man, a platform, and a speech, a spine, a voice, a mission, a goal, a purpose, a direction. That is what we need to take to our masses. Let's go do that. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this extended video for this dark room that I once again didn't do the thingy for because my tech just fell apart today. Appreciate you so much. Please check out this past week's edition of Black Agenda Report, which includes my article. And a whole bunch of other fantastic articles focusing on everything that is going on, not just domestically, but internationally. Please go to Black Alliance for Peace and get information about the week of action in support of Venezuela and against U.S. imperialism writ large that we are engaged in. Free Maduro and Celia, U.S. out of everywhere. Everywhere. A luta continua. The struggle continues. And do you know that the struggle continues whether you are engaged in it or not? So you might as well get involved in it. And if we keep studying this history, if we keep staying true to the theory, oh, thanks, Ricky, online international mobilization on the 25th. You can also get that information on Black Alliance for Peace. So much going on. I cannot keep it all in my head. But listen, history and theory are critical to organizing. Without it, you really are just making TikTok videos. I don't know what you're doing. Anyway, thanks. See y'all next time. Peace.